What you're about to see has never happened before at Buckingham Palace. A royal guard, stone-faced, immovable, suddenly broke formation in front of hundreds of tourists. Why? Because of one little girl in a wheelchair, silently saluting from the rope line. Guards aren't allowed to react, not to tears, not to laughter, not even to children. But in this moment, he didn't just react, he broke royal protocol in the most dignified way imaginable. Watch closely as he takes one step off mark, turns toward her, and does something so subtle, so powerful. It brought grown men in the crowd to tears. But what he did next? It changed the entire mood of the square. And no one who saw it will ever forget it. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. The house was quiet that morning, like it understood the importance of what lay ahead. In a small flat just outside Reading, sunlight streamed through floral curtains and landed gently on a child-sized wheelchair by the window. It had been polished the night before, twice actually, once by her mum and once again by her dad when he thought no one was looking. The wheels gleamed. The footrests had been adjusted 3 times just in case. And resting carefully across her lap now was a tiny Union Jack, folded the way her granddad used to fold his handkerchiefs. Neat corners, no creases. 8-year-old Clara Barton sat tall in that chair, legs tucked in a blanket patterned with cartoon soldiers, her dark hair freshly braided and tied with bright red ribbons. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't tired. She was ready. Today was the day. "Hold still, soldier," her mum said with a soft smile as she tied off the second braid. "We need you parade ready." Clara giggled. "Yes, Mum." Her father appeared in the doorway, already wearing his best pressed shirt, phone in one hand, camera in the other. "We've got just enough time to beat the worst of the crowds. Let's roll, trooper." But Clara wasn't quite finished. She reached over to the small nightstand beside her bed and retrieved something she'd kept hidden in a drawer for months. A small plastic guardsman figurine with a bright red coat, white belt, and a fuzzy little mock bearskin cap. It had been a birthday present when she turned 7. She hadn't gone a day without it since. She tucked it carefully under her blanket. "In case I get to see the real ones," she whispered. The tube ride into London was long, with 2 transfers and a brief delay outside Embankment, but Clara didn't complain once. Her eyes sparkled as the city unfolded around her, tall buildings and uniformed people and buses like red whales swimming through traffic. When the taxi from St. James's dropped them at Constitution Hill, the crowds were already forming. Dozens of tourists swirled around the gates of Buckingham Palace, voices rising in half a dozen languages. Camera shutters clicked. Children laughed. Somewhere, a street performer played violin near the Victoria Memorial. Clara sat very still as her father wheeled her through the throng toward the front ropes. She clutched the flag tightly, fingers trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. "Will I see them up close?" she asked softly. Her father leaned down. "We'll try our best, love." She nodded. Then, with quiet precision, she raised her right hand in a salute. It wasn't perfect. Her elbow wobbled and her fingers curled in a bit, but it was sincere. The woman standing next to them, an older Canadian tourist wearing a sun hat, noticed and smiled. "You look like you belong in the parade, sweetheart." Clara didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the open forecourt, waiting, watching. And when the first crack of boots on stone echoed in the air and the gates opened wide, she straightened her back. Because today wasn't just another trip. It wasn't even just about the royal guard. It was about finally being seen by someone she'd admired her whole life. The heat had crept up slowly, the kind that didn't shout but simmered, settling on skin like a second shirt. It radiated off the stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, bounced off the black iron railings, and clung to every wool-coated guard in its quiet intensity. By mid-morning, the crowd at the front of the forecourt had doubled. Tourists jostled politely for position, clutching their phones like lifelines, scanning for the perfect angle. A group of French students shared crisps from a paper bag. A pair of American honeymooners tried to figure out which direction the guard would enter from. One elderly man with a walking stick took up a spot directly behind the rope and didn't move an inch. Clara and her parents were just behind him. Her dad had gently eased her wheelchair into a shallow gap at the front, not intruding, not demanding, just waiting for space to open. The older man saw them, stepped aside with a respectful nod, and gave up his prime spot without a word. Clara's mum whispered a quiet "thank you" and offered him a bottle of water, which he declined with a shake of his head. From her new vantage point, Clara could see nearly everything. The twin rows of rope stretched out before her like invisible walls, holding the sea of tourists just far enough back. At the centre of the forecourt, the gravel shone pale and flat under the sunlight, a blank canvas soon to be marked by ceremonial boots and military history. But her eyes weren't on the gravel. They were on the men in red. There were 4 stationed at various intervals, still as statues, black bearskin caps towering, rifles angled with mathematical precision. Clara couldn't see their faces clearly from this distance, but it didn't matter. To her, they weren't just guards. They were giants, heroes, symbols of something she couldn't quite name but understood instinctively. She raised her hand again in a small salute. No one noticed, or at least none of the guards moved. But she kept it there for several long seconds before lowering it to her lap and resting the plastic figurine against her knee. Her father knelt beside her. "Comfortable?" She nodded wide-eyed. "They haven't blinked once." He smiled. "That's sort of the point." "Do they ever smile?" "Only on the inside." Clara didn't say anything more. She was studying one of the guards now, the one stationed closest to the gates, just to their left. Something about him caught her attention. She couldn't have explained it. Maybe it was how his chin tilted ever so slightly above the rest. Maybe it was nothing at all, but she kept watching him. And he did not move. Behind them, the crowd's hum grew louder. A wave of chatter swept through as the first distant sounds of brass drifted into earshot. Deep, measured, unmistakable. The changing of the guard had begun. Tourists angled their cameras. Tour guides raised flags to gather their groups. Children were hoisted onto shoulders, but Clara didn't move. She was already in position, already holding her flag like it was part of the ceremony, already watching the man who stood in silence just feet away. She didn't know his name. Didn't need to. He was a royal guard. That was enough. And though no one could see it from behind, her hand was inching toward her forehead again, ready to salute the way she'd practiced, waiting for the right moment. The music grew louder, then steadier, pulsing through the wide air of the forecourt in neat, ceremonial rhythm. Drums tapped like heartbeats. Brass instruments flared. Boots struck stone in perfect time. The changing of the guard had always been described as tradition, wrapped in precision. But to Clara, it felt like something else entirely, something alive. The procession passed through the gates with thunderous grace. The lead guards advanced in gleaming formation, scarlet tunics blazing under the morning sun. They moved like a single creature, heads level, arms stiff, boots synchronized. The crowd responded as crowds always do, hushed gasps, the flutter of phone cameras, a few poorly stifled cheers. But Clara didn't react. She wasn't watching the parade. She was watching him. The guard nearest their section, still posted near the edge of the rope line, hadn't moved in the slightest. His face remained partially shadowed beneath his towering bearskin cap. Eyes invisible, jaw fixed, spine impossibly straight. Even when the music swelled, even as tourists surged forward slightly for a better view, he held his position like a man carved from stone. Clara leaned forward in her chair, her flag pressed against her chest. She raised her hand again, slower this time, and saluted. It wasn't perfect, but it was practiced and sincere. Her mother reached down and gently steadied her wrist, but Clara didn't pull away. Her eyes never left him. Something shifted. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone could point to. But those who were looking closely, really looking, might have noticed the slight flex of one white-gloved finger. The smallest change in the angle of a boot, a subtle tightening of the jaw. And then it happened. For the briefest moment, so quick that most people missed it entirely, the guard's eyes moved. Downward, just enough to meet hers. There was no smile, no nod, no dramatic reaction, but the contact was unmistakable. Clara's hand, still raised in salute, trembled, not from fear, from the shock of being seen. Tourists nearby began to murmur. Did he just... I think he... Wait, was that allowed? Someone lowered their phone. A woman to the right, clutching a guidebook, looked at the girl in the chair and then back at the guard with a hand on her chest. Oh my! But he was already still again. Back in formation. Face forward, like nothing had happened. Clara's father looked down at her. She was frozen in place. Salute still up, eyes wide, breath held tight in her chest. Then, slowly, reverently, she lowered her hand. Neither of her parents spoke. They didn't have to. Because in that one moment, something had happened that no camera had caught. No phone had recorded. No announcement had accompanied. A royal guard had seen their daughter. Truly seen her, and had broken the unbreakable just long enough to acknowledge her courage with a glance. No one cheered. No one clapped. But the mood at the front of the rope line had shifted. The crowd stood quieter now. The spectacle still unfolded, the music, the marching, the tradition. But those who had witnessed the moment were no longer watching just a performance. They were watching a man. A man who had just given a little girl the kind of recognition some people wait their whole lives for. And Clara. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair and sat as straight as the guards themselves. Because now she knew what it felt like to be honoured. Without a word, without a stage, by someone who had mastered the art of silence. It should have ended there. A glance, barely perceptible, then silence. But it didn't. Because just when the crowd thought the moment had passed, the guard did something that shouldn't have happened. Not here, not in full view of the forecourt, not in the middle of a centuries-old ceremony designed to resist all personal expression. He moved, not as part of a drill or command, not in lockstep with the changing ranks, but alone. With deliberate calm, the guard shifted his left boot half a step to the side. It was nothing at first glance, a realignment, a reset, but to anyone who understood the rigidity of ceremonial posture, it was startling, a departure, a choice. Then he turned, just enough to face her fully. No one made a sound. The ripple through the crowd was electric, dozens of conversations halting mid-sentence, phones slowly lowering, children blinking in confusion. A man holding a DSLR stopped clicking and simply stared. Clara was frozen. Her mouth opened just slightly. She wasn't sure what to do. She had saluted before, twice, but this felt different, because he wasn't just looking now, he was standing for her. The guard raised his right hand, gloved in white, and brought it slowly to his brow. Not the textbook ceremonial salute, no rigid angles, no performative snap. This one was slower, personal, intentional, and it was only for her. The kind of gesture you make when words won't do justice. When you're not saluting rank or royalty, but courage. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt longer. Clara saluted back. The little flag in her lap fluttered as she raised her hand again, straighter this time. Her spine pressed against the back of the chair, her braids tight against her shoulders, her face glowing with something that didn't look like excitement anymore. It looked like understanding. Her mother wiped one eye. Her father didn't move, his hands still resting gently on the push bars behind her, but his jaw was clenched just slightly. Around them, the crowd had stopped moving entirely. Even the tourists who didn't know what they were witnessing felt the weight of it. Because sometimes silence is louder than applause. The salute ended the way it began, without fanfare. The guard lowered his hand, adjusted his footing, and resumed position, chin up, eyes forward, rifle steady. The line never wavered. The ceremony continued like nothing had happened, except everything had. The band marched on. Boots echoed across the stones. Officers called signals in low voices, but those who had seen the gesture couldn't unsee it. They whispered to one another, careful not to break the sacred stillness that had briefly touched the square. A woman near the back leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Never seen one of them move like that, not once. Not even when someone fainted last summer." He didn't reply, just kept his eyes on the guard who had returned to stillness. Near the rope line, a young man with a lanyard and press badge stared down at his phone. He hadn't hit record in time. Whatever had happened, it belonged to memory now, not footage, and somehow that felt right. The little girl in the wheelchair turned to her father. "Did he really do that for me?" Her father didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "I think he did." Clara looked back at the guard. Her face was unreadable, serious in a way children rarely are. Then she whispered, "I'm going to remember that forever." Behind them, an elderly man who'd been silent the entire ceremony leaned slightly and muttered, not to anyone in particular, "Never thought I'd see that. Not in my lifetime." A few others around him nodded, still stunned. But no one clapped, no one cheered. This wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, they watched the rest of the changing of the guard with new eyes. The spectacle hadn't changed, but their understanding of it had. What had once seemed like rigid performance now shimmered with something else. Something human. A woman near the gift shop was telling her partner it was just the smallest thing, but it made everyone stop. A child with a Buckingham Palace snow globe clutched it tight and whispered, "I think the guard looked at me too," though her father smiled knowingly, knowing she hadn't been the one he saw. At the far edge of the crowd, a man in a grey blazer was still looking across the courtyard with his hands in his pockets. He turned to his friend and said, "You can keep your selfies. That's the moment I'll remember." But no one pulled out a phone to post it. No headlines followed, no news reports, no trending hashtag, and that was exactly how it should be. Back in the barracks, the guards were already changing out of their ceremonial kits. Tunics hung on wooden pegs, white gloves were folded and stacked, polished boots were quietly unlaced. The man who had moved, who had saluted, said nothing. He didn't need to. Another guard passed him by and paused just long enough to murmur, "They saw it." No reply. A sergeant walked through the hallway a few minutes later, glanced at him, and simply nodded once. Still he didn't speak. He folded his gloves. He cleaned his rifle. He returned his kit like every other day. But when he opened his locker, there was a photo inside, taped to the inner door, behind a shaving kit and a pressed cap badge. It showed a little girl, maybe 6, sitting in a wheelchair in front of a small church, saluting with her left hand instead of her right. Next to her stood a man in uniform, hand resting gently on her shoulder. The man was his brother, and the girl was Clara. He removed the photo once each year on this day, until now. Now he looked at it a moment longer, then closed the locker. Out on the mall, the family waited at the curb for a taxi. Clara was quiet again, but not in the same way as before. She didn't ask if anyone else had seen it. She didn't ask if they could return tomorrow. She simply held the small plastic guardsman in her hand and whispered, "He didn't smile. But I think he meant it." Her mum kissed the top of her head. "So do I." As the taxi pulled away, Clara turned back for one last look at the palace gates. The courtyard was empty now, just gravel and heat, and the echo of boots that had already faded. But to Clara, it wasn't empty at all, and it was full. If you'd been in the crowd that day, would you have even noticed that tiny moment? Or would you have missed it? Just another tourist waiting for the next photo. And here's the bigger question. Have you ever seen someone bend the rules? Not for attention, not for praise, but simply because it was the right thing to do? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if this moment meant something to you, give the video a like and share it with someone who still believes quiet respect matters. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon. Because every day we bring you stories like this one. Moments where the red coat stands, not just for ceremony, but for something deeply human. And if you thought this story said everything without a single word, wait until you see the next one on your screen right now. We'll see you there.